Buddy. And so we sent out the draft slides on Daniel 8. And because it's 2 weeks in between, classes, the Lord keeps showing me stuff on this. So I got a few context slides that we're going to go through first. And to help set the context for Daniel 8. We're going to jump right into Daniel 8. So you haven't seen these slides yet, but these slides are part of a new lesson plan that I'm putting together. So you'll probably see them again later, or may see them again later. So so the first change is, the original title of this lesson, every time I've taught it has been The Little Horn Rises, but I picked up on this one scripture about the coming of the Lawless One. And I'm seeing more and more the mirror, so to speak, between the Christ, the Messiah, our Messiah, and the Antichrist. So many times in the Bible you see even prophecies about Jesus, and in the same line or the same paragraph there's a prophecy about the Antichrist too. So it's always difficult for me to know like what to teach first, what precept to teach first when you're teaching about the end times. Do you teach about the Antichrist before you teach the abomination of desolation, or do you do the opposite, that type of thing. But the Antichrist, of course, is the one who brings about, or central figure in this abomination of desolation. So it seems right that we set some context here. Daniel 8 is one of the things that happens just prior to the Great Tribulation. So that's why I want to set the context for this. So we'll go through some of these slides real quick. And of course, Matthew 24, we always almost anchor back to that, because that's, Jesus is teaching on these things. And he starts out, telling the disciples when they ask him about this to watch out that no one deceives you. And this word deceive and deception is mentioned many, many times when you read these things, especially in the New Testament, concerning the end times and this period of Daniel's 70th week. So I'm going to highlight here verse 12, Matthew 24:12, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. And this is when Jesus is talking about this time leading up to the great tribulation, this 42 months of great tribulation. He's talking about these are the birth pains, and because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will go cold. So here's a slide right off of 2022 time frame. And take a look at this picture. This is 2 years after COVID. The increase of wickedness, the increase of lawlessness. This, and the deception all at once. The increase of wickedness and the deception. Half the population of the United States is believing it's an okay and good idea for grown men our age to run operating rooms in hospitals and and mutilate the genitals of young boys and young girls. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing, right? It's a good thing. It's cheered on. It's protected by law by some people. And here's another thing, increase of wickedness. This has been going on for a long time, this kind of attitude toward the Jews and the land and the Holy Covenant. But you're seeing it increase across the world, this increase of wickedness. Celebrating the murder, celebrating the genocide. We're going to take a look at a couple of So in Thessalonians, this is one of the verses we've already looked at. This is one of 4 verses in the Bible that's, referring to the rapture, talking about the rapture. And where Paul here is talking to the Thessalonians and telling them that, the coming of the Lord and us being gathered to him, these things both happen on the day of the Lord. But he keeps talking, don't let anyone deceive you in any way. So there's more of this warning about deception. And what I'm seeing today is mass deception. Mass deception. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day, the day of the Lord, will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed. So this is one of the spots in the Bible where this Antichrist figure is called the man of lawlessness, the man doomed to destruction. And then this reference here to the actual abomination of desolation is going to take place. So we studied these verses, these first 4 verses. But now let's look at the next verse, the very next verse, right, of this same passage. So that's Thessalonians 2, 1-4. Now we're going to go verse 5. Here's Paul talking. Don't you remember that when I was with you, I used to tell you these things? And oh, by the way, in Acts, you can read in the book of Acts about Paul's visit to Thessalonica. He was only there for 3 weeks. And then they had to get him out of the city because they were going to string him up, right? And then he went to Berea. And don't you remember? So this is an unreached people group, brand new believers. He's with them for 3 weeks. And he's already talking to them about the Antichrist and the man of lawlessness. Don't you remember that when I was with you, I used to tell you these things? And now you know what is holding him back so that he may be revealed at the proper time. He's talking about this Antichrist figure. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work. But the one who now holds it back will continue to do so until it's taken out of the way. And then the lawlessness will be revealed. The lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendors of his coming. So here's this phrase that I picked up on, the coming of the lawless. See, as juxtaposed in this same, very short time period, the coming of the Son of Man, the coming of the lawless one. Coming of the lawless one comes first. And then when the lawless one is revealed, boom, that kicks off the abomination of desolation. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with how Satan works. He will use all sorts of displays of power through signs and wonders that serve the lie, and all the ways that wickedness deceives those who are perishing. They perish because they refuse to love the truth, and so be saved. For this reason, this is very important now, so slow down and read this one really close. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. These words remind me very, very much of what happened in the Exodus, when Moses was in Egypt and Pharaoh was waffling back and forth, do I let these guys go or not? Do I let these guys go or not? And God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that God could show himself holy in the eyes of all the nations and in the eyes of all the Israelites too, Verse 11, for this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. Who's they? The ones who don't believe the truth. And so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth, but have delighted in wickedness. And that is the thing that has been catching my attention with what's going on in the world for the last 15 or 20 years. There's not just this increase of wickedness. it's a delight of wickedness. It's a celebration of wickedness. This is from last week. You got a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, back on the previous slide. And at the end of verse 7. But the one who holds it back.
Well, yeah.
Who's the one that is holding it back?
Well, there's debate on this among a lot of scholars. You know, a lot of people who've written, you know, end times books who have not studied very well, in my opinion, they said, oh, this is the church. Obviously, the church is holding back the powers of darkness. Some people think it's the Holy Spirit. I don't know what they base that on. Other people believe it's Satan. Satan is the one who is holding this back until he is taken out of the way. Satan is cast out of heaven right about the exact time that the abomination of desolation takes place. And he doesn't have access to heaven anymore. So to me, that makes the most biblical sense, but it's really not clear, you know, who the restrainer is. But that makes the most biblical sense to me. And he's also, Satan is also the one who absolutely doesn't want to lose that place. In fact, that heaven is sort of a sanctuary for him right now. So it's a sanctuary gets taken away from him. He gets cast down to the earth. When he gets cast down to the earth, he gives his power to a human. So this is sort of a dark shadow of Jesus's ministry, you know. Jesus got baptized, the Holy Spirit descends on him like a dove, right? Satan gets cast down from heaven and he descends onto this human person and then turns his power over to this human person or possesses him, you know. But anyway, that's debated who the restrainer is.
So the whole idea here that they serve the lie that the lie goes back to
Yeah, here.
Yeah, they serve the lie. Here, they refuse to love the truth. Okay, and what you'll see if you look at what, and you talk to people that are delighting wickedness, is that they have refused to acknowledge that there is anything like truth, or that there is an absolute, that there is absolute truth. They refuse to acknowledge.
Truth is thrown to the ground.
Yeah, and so because of that, then they can believe the lie, but the believing the lie is simply believing the lie that Christ isn't the way, the truth, and the life. Yeah, but the whole idea of there being an absolute truth is just been thrown out. It's actually the one thing that we actually have to stand on, that there is an absolute.
You mean I don't get to make up my own truth?
Well, you
I can't-
can, but you'll be wrong.
I can't be my own God anymore? Why not?
You'd be same as.
What about
Eve.
Scientology?
But verse 11, God sends them a powerful delusion. So in my humble opinion, there's a powerful delusion going on the earth. For 6,000 years of biblical history, it hasn't been okay to cut your dick off. We're on, so I should use a different word, right? For it's being recorded, you know, to like emasculate yourself and celebrate it, you know. I mean, 1600s, people would have thought you're nuts. 1700s, people would have thought you're out of your mind. They'd have burned you at the stake. 1800s, same thing.
Now it's lack of nuts.
1950s, same thing. Now all of a sudden it's a good thing. This is a powerful delusion among.
So if you go to Romans 1, you'll see the wrath of God revealed against all ungodliness and unrighteousness, and Paul, again, the same writer, talking about this, but it comes to point, verse 24, it says, therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, to exchange the truth of God for the lie. Some of the same people worship and serve the creature rather than the creator who is blessed forever. Amen. So that's in Romans 1, and he's saying the same thing here. They worship and serve the creature rather than the creator. They exchange the truth of God for a lie.
Same type of language. There it is. And so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth, but have delighted in wickedness. So look at what was just read in Romans 1. And look at this picture. This is last week. 300,000 people in Tel Aviv, Israel, delighting in wickedness.
So get the irony here, though. Read the thing here. They met at the park Friday, June 7th for a party bash until sunset before Sabbath. Before Sabbath. Why would they care whether the Sabbath starts?
Yeah, when they're already. Yeah, I read the same thing. Well, this is the largest gay pride event probably, in the world. And it's more celebrated than just about any other country.
In Israel.
Delighting in wickedness. Check this one out.
What?
So here we are. Drag Queen Story Hour happening in libraries. Now, how would you like this drag queen to be in the books that are being read here are children's books that say, trans, this whole pushing this whole trans agenda. This is just one thing, but if this guy had shown up at a kid's event or anywhere in town in the 1850s or 1950s, it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened. This is delighting in wickedness. This is calling good evil and evil good. And in fact, if you stand up against this, you're the bad guy, right?
I just want to say something. My Bible plan for the day was running. This what Dean was talking about, and I highlighted it. Here's the rest of it. In reality, truth of God is known instinctively. God has embedded this knowledge inside every human. He's allowed us to have the truth in us. It's just a matter of us believing. Because the creation of the world was the invisible qualities of God's nature has been made visible, such as its eternal power and transcendence. He has made wonderful attributes easily perceived. Seeing the visible makes us understand the invisible. So then he leaves everyone without excuse. But he already put that in us. Now all this garbage is coming to the sea. It's unreal. I am seeing from my mind, but it's just hard to fathom. Right. It really is.
I think I shared this last time, but man, it just fits in even better now. First, we overlook evil, then we permit evil, then we legalize evil, then we promote evil, then we celebrate evil, then we persecute those who still call it evil.
Oh,
Okay. And then Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil.
and so in this very short, condensed period of time leading up to the abomination of desolation, this deception is going to go worldwide, and it's going to go on steroids. Why? Look at the middle verse here. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion. God's in control of this. Look at this one from Ezekiel. He's talking about Gog, the Antichrist. At that time, they, being the holy prophets, prophesied for years that I I, Yahweh, would bring you, the Antichrist, against them. God is bringing the Antichrist against them. Look at this one. From Revelation, for God has put it into their hearts. This is talking about these 10 kings that give also turn their power over to the Antichrist. He's put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose, God's purpose, by agreeing to hand over to the beast, the Antichrist, their authority, until God's words are fulfilled. God is in charge of this. God is allowing this to happen in a similar way to how he blinded the Jews. It said they've been blinded for a while. They can't see the Messiah, you know. In the end, he'll remove the blinders and reveal himself. But God, it was given power. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority. The beast is getting its authority from God.
Is that the first,
It,
is that the
what-
first, 36, the 3.5 years of it? Is that where it says for 42 months? Is that-
yes, yeah, for the 42 months, that's the second half of Daniel's 70th week. So this is the period of the Great Tribulation. So the beast was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. God, I mean, as terrible as it sounds, as terrible as it is, as terrible as it's hard to look at, is this mass deception and an increase in lawlessness and increase in wickedness is going on. This is part of God's plan, and he is, you know, Satan's going to come down here for 42 months to exercise his authority as the head of this beast empire, really. But God is the one who's, you know, he's a devil, but he's God's devil. For God's purposes, he's given him this authority. And God is also sending this powerful delusion to those who don't believe the truth. So there are the elect, and there are those that are not the elect. And it just seems like those that are not the elect are the ones that are victims of this powerful delusion that God is sending.
So, and that, I think, the answer to my question is, God would be the restrainer. Right? Does he's been restraining it. And now he's given them.
Well, whoever the strainer is also is taken out of the way.
Oh, okay.
Unlikely he'll be the one taking. it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's the one that's, you know.
He's the one orchestrating everything in full control. There's another clue in this I think it's in Daniel. Maybe we'll see that verse tonight. It's absolutely in Daniel. I'm just not sure what chapter it is, where Gabriel's talking to Daniel and says, I would have got here sooner, but you know, the Prince of Persia was in my way and he held me back for 30 days. So 21 days then. So there's this idea that these principalities are fighting, with each other up there in heaven, and they don't. Satan, the last thing he wants is for the tribulation to start. When the tribulation starts, he's thrown out of heaven. He's lost his place.
And he knows his time is limited.
And he knows his time is limited, and he knows what happens at the end. He can read scripture. So he tries to stop these things from happening. In the heavenly realm, so to speak. But he won't be allowed to do that. He won't have that power.
Daniel 10,
Tim,
Daniel 10, which is where he talks about the Prince of Persia, or the kingdom, Prince of the Kingdom of Persia was serving 21 days. Old Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me drive and left one here.
yeah, so the king of Persia there is apparently the bad guy, the bad principality, and there's another bad principality, the king of Greece.
What about is Michael maybe be one of the bulls?
It
I know.
could,
It's
but
one of those things that he I think specifically left unclear because we didn't obsess on it too much.
yeah, there's just no detail on it, so it's hard to know. So, so here's our Daniel 70th week, and so Jesus is talking about his beginning of birth pains when a lot of this is happening, hard labor and birth. So another way to think of this, and then here's the abomination of desolation. This is what starts the 42 months of tribulation. And this great celestial event is the big monster event, worldwide, global, heavenly event that ends that 3.5 years, that ends that 42 months. And we got a class on the great celestial event coming up. But another way to think about these things these are the events that happen before the Great Tribulation. This is the start of the Great Tribulation, the abomination and desolation. Then you've got these events that happen during the Great Tribulation. And then you've got a whole bunch of events that happen after the Great Tribulation, which is after the day of the Lord, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. For 7 years, they burn the weapons for fuel. For 7 months or 5 months, I forget which time it is, they go around and, police up the dead bodies, and there's things that are talked about that happen after the Lord comes back, including, the Lord goes to Egypt and he cleans up Egypt, and, they marches back up through the Sinai, and then he calls all these armies to Jerusalem, in the valley of Jehoshaphat, right outside Jerusalem, and judges them. So we're getting close here to starting on Daniel, but I just want to give it the context. You'll see. So this is a teaching. So here's Matthew 24. We've read through all of this. And here's the things that Jesus says happened before the Great Tribulation starts. And these are what he ends up calling, the beginnings of birth pains. Then here he talks about from 15 to 28, in these verses, he talks about what happens during the Great Tribulation. And then in the same chapter, boom, 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 he also talks about some things that happen after the tribulation. And you'll see this pattern over and over and over with the prophets in the Old Testament. In Ezekiel 38 talks about these same events. Ezekiel 39 is another prophecy about Ezekiel, talks about these same events, before, during, and after. See the same thing in Daniel 11, Revelation. Another place this is done is in Daniel 8. So we're gonna jump right into Daniel 8 here. So in Daniel 8, he talks about events before and events during. And you could other prophets focus on events after, like here in Joel. You got all this great information here, a lot of it that happens after the Great Tribulation. And another one is Zechariah too. Here's almost the better part of 3 chapters. Boom, boom, boom. Tells you what happens after the Great Tribulation. So anyway, this is a whole nother teaching, but it's just to give people the references where they can look and learn, what's going on during the tribulation, what are the things leading up to it. So one of the things leading up to it is Daniel 8. And where this little horn rises up. And other places to study about this lawless one. It's got a whole bunch of different names. Isaiah talks about him a lot. Ezekiel talks about him a lot. It's very, very, very detailed, good stuff here in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Daniel talks about him a lot. So Daniel has 4 prophecies. We're going to go through one of these prophecies here in just a second. Of course, Thessalonians, where I looked at that, John, 1 John, and Revelation. So but it's so interesting there. Paul's at Thessalonica. He's there for 3 weeks. Unreached people group. First time they've heard the gospel, probably. Brand new believers. And he launches right into this teaching with these guys. So this is not something we should hold back on. This is something that Paul wanted them to know. And Of course, they didn't know when the Lord was coming back. So. Now, Daniel 8. So I started a while ago. Daniel has 4 main prophecies. It's really 5 big visions in Daniel, but the one in chapter 2 is not Daniel's vision. He interprets it, but that was a dream vision that was given to Nebuchadnezzar. You know, but Daniel himself, he has this encounter with the angel and this huge vision in Daniel 7. So that's one of them. Daniel 8 is another one. Daniel 9 is another one. And then Daniel 10, 11, 12 is the 4th one. Remember, the chapter markings weren't there. So Daniel 10, 11, 12 is just one big long dream. And also the interesting thing about Daniel is these things get interpreted for him. Gabriel shows up and interprets these things for Daniel. So we have very good clarity on them. And that's the case in Daniel 8. So first we'll just go through the text and then we'll get into the discussion on it. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the one that had already appeared to me. So he's talking about Daniel 7. That was the first vision that appeared to him. This is the second. In my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. And in the vision, I was beside the Ulai Canal. So just for geographic context here. Mediterranean, Red Sea, Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia today. Here's Israel, Syria, Iraq, Iran. It was called Persia until 1935. Remember, so this is Susa. Susa is a big capital, big historic capital. It's in the Bible. This is where Esther, Queen Esther was, you know, and the book of Esther, and this is where she lived, and all, you know, all those things happened. So it was a capital city that was used a lot. This is the province of Elam in this time. So this is the geographic location that we're referencing. Still a city today. It's in western Iran.
What's the name of the city?
I think it's Shushan. Shushan. So, verse 3. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns standing beside the canal, the Ulai Canal, which is apparently there in that city. And the horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. So, throughout the Old Testament here, when you have a beast like that, normally represents an empire or a nation, and then the horns usually represent the leadership or the kings. And that is the case here. Well, Gabriel will tell us that later. I watched the ram as it charged toward the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. So this is a military launch out, taking over, neighboring countries, neighboring territory. And so this 2-horned ram goes to the north, goes west to the sea. The actual text here is west to the sea and south from Susa. And how far north, how far west, how far? Well, we know they go west to the sea, but we don't know how far south there. And as I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. It came toward the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged at it in great rage. So this 2-horned ram, it gets counterattacked by this other nation, this other empire. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue from its power. So, so from the west, we got this. And Gabriel tells us this is the area, by the way, here in just a second. The one horn goat counterattacks and takes over all this territory that the ram had just, taken over previously. The goat became very great. So when the two-horned ram launches out, he becomes great. But when the goat counterattacks, he becomes very great. But at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. So these are arbitrary lines here, arbitrary geographic lines that would split that entire Middle East territory up into 4 different regions, north, south, east, and west, basically. So out of one of those regions, so remember, the height of this goat's power, he dies, or he's gone somehow, he's broken off. And these 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came another horn. So, which started small but grew in power to the south and the east toward the beautiful land, toward the land of the covenant, the land of the holy covenant, Israel. It grew until it reached the host of heavens, and it threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. So, not only does the abomination of desolation get set up in the temple, that temple sanctuary gets thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice was given over to it. It prospered in everything it did. And truth, there's that verse I was reaching for a while ago, and truth was thrown to the ground. So in all of Daniel's 4 prophecies, in 7, 8, 9, then 10, 11, 12, all of them start out with this historical context. So to Daniel, from where Daniel was in time, he was still looking forward. It was still future to him. But from where we're standing, we can see fulfillment of Daniel 8 in history, and we'll go through that here in just a second when we start getting into Gabriel's. So we see part of that fulfillment in history, but then right in the middle of talking about what we would think of as history, without, the Medes and Persians taking over from the Babylonians, and then Alexander the Great sweeping in from the west and taking over the whole area, and he becomes very great. Right in the middle of that, in all of these prophecies, you see this jump to discussion of the very end times fulfillment of these prophecies. And they go right to the Antichrist. There's so much information about the Antichrist in these prophecies of Daniel. So this, from verse 9 on here, we know 100% this is talking about the Antichrist in the end times. And so while I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man. And I heard a man's voice from the Ulai calling, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision. So here's the verse we know that this angel here is Gabriel, that's talking to Daniel. And a man's voice came from the Ulai, another angel, it could be God, who knows. As he came near the place where I was standing, as Gabriel came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. Son of man, he said to me, understand that the vision concerns the time of the end. While he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. Then he touched me and raised me to my feet. He said, I'm going to tell you what will happen in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns the appointed time, the end. It's Gabriel telling Daniel. Okay, so now Gabriel is explaining to him, the imagery here. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. So back in those days, it's where the Medes were here, Persians were here. They joined together, created this Persian Empire, which today is Iran.
The ones that just shot the missiles at Israel.
Right, yeah, exactly. What do I do here? Okay, the kings of the two-horned ram represent the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece. So this word in Hebrew here, it's word in Hebrew now in Daniel, is Yavan. So Yavan represents the area exactly where Alexander the Great came from, which is Macedonia, Western Turkey. Most of Yavan will be made up by the western part of Turkey today. But it's translated Greece in most all English Bibles. And the large horn, the shaggy goat's the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. So most people interpret that, I think rightly so, historically as being Alexander the Great, the first king of Greece. Greece really didn't exist as a nation before then. The four horns that replace the one that was broken off represent the four kingdoms that will emerge from this nation and not have the same power. So there were four nations that came after Alexander the Great died, but there was actually five major ones that fought these wars for several years, called the War of the Diadochi, I think, the successors, the War of the Successors to Alexander, and then they eventually had their own kingdoms. So Gabriel continues, in the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce looking king. So now Gabriel is now switched in talking about the Antichrist. A master of infantry will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. So he becomes very strong because he gets given authority by Satan. Satan is cast out of heaven. He becomes very strong because Satan gives him his authority. He will cause astounding devastation and succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper. The truth gets thrown to the ground. This guy causes deceit to prosper. He will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, they being the holy people, he will destroy many, take his stand against the prince of princes, against Jesus. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. So he gets destroyed by Jesus when Jesus returns, by the breath of his mouth. He goes on to talk about this vision of the evenings and mornings, which is that 2,300 day period from when the sacrifices start in the temple to when the temple is cleansed after Jesus comes back. But we haven't talked about that period before yet. Okay, so the debate is, so I don't like to get into speculation. I like to stick straight to God's word. But you reach a certain point where you have no option other than to speculate, based upon all the other scriptures and things that you read. But there's really two main interpretations, I guess you could call it, for Daniel 8. One is that it's purely historical, it's the Medes and Persians taken over from Babylonians and Alexander the Great. Then there's this just big gap period of time, and all of a sudden, we're talking about in the end times, we're talking about the Antichrist. And so the whole backdrop of Alexander the Great and the Medes and Persians and all that historical context is just sort of a type and shadow. Just to sort of let you know, when you see other parts of Daniel, when he's talking about the king of the north and the king of the south, that's talking about Turkey and Syria going against Egypt. It just gives you a historical context to help understand the direct prophecies about the Antichrist. That's one view of this. The other view is that, nope, yeah, those things did happen in history, but that type of stuff, that very, very similar battle, empire fighting, between the king of Persia and the king of Greece, these principalities, is going to happen again in the end times. And so, and that's held, go down. Yeah, that's held because in Daniel 8, you get these statements by Gabriel that says, this vision concerns the time of the end, the time of wrath, the appointed time of the end, the distant future. So Gabriel's telling Daniel, this vision concerns the end times. But he doesn't come out and say the vision concerns the end times, and these wars are exactly going to duplicate themselves. All of Daniel's visions, like I said before, they have this historical context, and then it breaks right into these prophecies about the end times. But within the prophecies about the end times, like in the other visions he has in Daniel 9, Daniel 10, 11, 12, you see this very specific stuff going on in the end times. Like the Antichrist, one of the things that happens before the abomination of desolations takes place is this war going back and forth between the Turkish, Syrian League of Nations there and fighting specifically against Egypt. They go back and forth a few times. And finally the Antichrist, the king of the north, turns and vents his fury against the Holy Covenant, and his army launches in, invades Jerusalem, and executes the abomination of desolation right there. So we have this really detailed context about the king of the north and the king of the south. So I'm trying to give you the information and the facts as I know them without speculating, and it's really hard to do. It really is, because at some point you got to go, well, I'm not sure, which way to go, which way to interpret this. So what I've done is always kept an eye open for what's going on in the world, and kept an eye on Iran specifically, very, very closely. So here's another view of the exact same territory. So Israel's here, right? Saudi Arabia, Iran sits on here's the Persian Gulf, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait. And this represents all the gas and oil, natural gas and oil reserves there in this entire area. Daniel didn't know about natural gas and oil. And he also didn't know about anything about Islam. So we'll take a look at that in a second too. But whoever takes over this whole area is definitely going to become great. So if this is, as Gabriel says, this vision concerns the time of the end, and maybe these conquests by Alexander the Great and the Medes and Persians are types and shadows of what's going to happen here in the end times, then If that's true, then we can expect Iran would launch out. Because Iran and Persia are the exact same thing. And if they attack this way from Susa and they go north, west, and south, they're going to end up controlling all of this, all of these natural resources, which they would, so they would become great. They'd be, they'd be very rich, very powerful, They'd have all the wealth of the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, and their own. And they would control both sides of the Persian Gulf here. So they'd have the place locked up very, very tightly.
The majority of the world gets all of its energy.
Well, over 25% of it comes from right there. And so they would become very great. And they would become great. And of course, Iran's got 88 million people, so they have a very large army, very, very large reserve army. And Saudi Arabia does not, Iran has all kinds of water. Saudi Arabia is dependent upon salinization plants here and here for all of their water. And so this is just one of the many prophecies about this period of time before the Great Tribulation. Zechariah 12, I like this one. Verse 2, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding nations, all the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. On that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. So who are all the surrounding peoples around Jerusalem? So these are all the Islamic nations. You can see right here, this little section of the map is not green. And all the rest of these nations completely surrounding Israel today are Islamic. And we saw that slide earlier of the Islamic nations, celebrating the murder of these 1,200 innocent people, like this is a good idea, a great thing. So I'm going to make Jerusalem send all these surrounding nations, all these surrounding peoples reeling. They can't stand themselves, they got to do something. They hate the fact that the Jews are in charge of this piece of land that by all rights should be Muslim territory, this piece of land that was given to Abraham long ago by covenant. So this whole is really goes right back to the Abraham covenant, the Holy Covenant. Daniel mentions the Holy Covenant many times. Every time you see the Holy Covenant mentioned, it's speaking specifically throughout the Old Testament about the Abraham covenant. I give you this land for eternity, from the river Euphrates to the Wadi of Egypt. And these guys, Satan doesn't like it. So in Islam, you got this Mecca, Medina, and Al-Quds, Jerusalem. Third holiest site, first, second, and third. So this third holiest site to all Islam is Jerusalem, and they want it back. They want these infidels out of there, river to the sea, push these guys out of these Muslim lands. I'll make Jerusalem and Judea. Let's go back and read it. Cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Controversy of Zion. It's the controversy of that piece of land God promised to Abraham and gave it. Satan knows Jesus is going to come back and set up the royal throne of David again, his father right there in Jerusalem. And God, where the temple is in Jerusalem, God says that's the place I chose. For some reason, God chose that spot. Lord's gonna come back there for the 1,000 years, he's gonna reign from right there. Satan wants that seat, he wants to reign from there, he doesn't want Jesus to reign from there, he wants to reign from there. He's trying to use all these nations as he has in the past, 7 different times, 7 different empires to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. So he's gonna come back and set up this 8th empire to try to do the same thing. So these are the surrounding nations. Daniel didn't know about Islam because Islam hadn't come around yet. Here's another look at Islam. So in this here, the blue, the light blue represents Sunni Islam, and the green represents Shia Islam. So Islam's been divided since the death of Muhammad over who should be the successor to Muhammad. So the green area here, Iran, is 90 to 95% Shiite. Iraq, 65 to 70% Shiite. So these guys, Iran, since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, has had this special force working outside the country to try to export this Islamic Shiite revolution to these other nations. And they fermented this in, Lebanon. That's why you have Hezbollah here. In Yemen, that's why there's been a civil war down here, and then the Shiites have taken over this part of Yemen, really close to the Straits right here. And they are budding out, trying to take over the entire Middle East. They want to control these holy cities, Mecca and Medina, and they want to control here. In fact, this force that works for the Supreme Leader and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is essentially like the SS under Hitler. They're the ideological army underneath the Supreme Leader of Iran. The force that does all this foreign work is called the Al-Quds Force, because the focus is on retaking Jerusalem. Al-Quds is Arabic for Jerusalem. So they're after this spot. So you see that geographically, the players are the same as in the historical fulfillment of Daniel 8. We call it historical, it's still future to Daniel, but we call it historical because it, that happened in history. But it's the same players are involved today.
Can I ask the question, just for clarification?
Yeah.
So the little horn that rises, the Lawless One, that person is essentially coming from Western Turkey.
Turkey, Syria,
And is he then likely Sunni, or is he gonna be a Shiite?
Sunni,
He's gonna be Sunni.
yeah, 100%.
So why do you say that so surely?
Well, Syria is predominantly Sunni, right? It's controlled by the minority sect here because these guys, we put 42 military bases here since the ISIS guys came through. So Turkey is Sunni. Three different major heads of the Islamic Empire since 682, when the Islamic Empire really took off. One was Arab and based here. Your Arabs. It was also controlled from Persia for a while. And then most recently, it was controlled, yeah. Boom, right here. It was controlled by the Ottomans, the Turks, for the last 500 years of the empire. So this empire stretches like all the way across North Africa and up into Europe through Spain and Portugal, goes all the way over to India at its highest point, and all the way up through the Caucasus, all the way up into Central Europe, to the gates of Vienna. All controlled by this gigantic Islamic empire, largest empire on the face of the planet ever, geographically, right? And then it didn't end until 1921. At the end of World War II, they finally did away with the caliph, the office of the caliph, and And then, at the end, so all these lands were taken over, at the end of, the Ottomans were allied with the Germans in World War One. So they lost World War One, so the World War One great powers, France and Britain, they assumed control over all of the Ottoman lands. And then they divided the Middle East up into all these countries. And so that was 100 years ago. And I'll tell you what, the guys that ran it for that long, the Turks, they want it back. They want to come back and be the kings. These guys, by default, ended up with it. But they don't have the military power or the
They
wherewithal.
basically had this, that's where Muhammad.
Yes, yeah. And, but these guys used to control it all. These guys used to control it all. When the Persians controlled it all, it was Shiite Islam. So they fought back and forth, these two sects of Islam, many times, you know, since 682. And then when you read in Daniel 11, you'll read about, you know, the king of Persia, boom, the bad guys, that principality. That's, you know, we fight against principalities and powers of the air. So that's the king of Persia, and you also got this guy called the king of Greece, who's another bad guy. So that they fight against each other, and so there's been several wars between groups here and groups here over history. So we're really looking at maybe Alexander the Great being a type of shadow. These guys are going to launch out and try to take over and be successful, taking over the entire Middle East. If what Gabriel is saying here is going to repeat itself, you know, fully repeat itself.
And then they will be overcome by the.
And then they'll take over.
From Turkey.
Yeah, they'll take over all this and they'll become great for a while. They'll control that oil and gas reserves. And then they will be counterattacked by a coalition of Sunni nations who will then take over the entire Middle East. And then they'll split it up into 4 different territories, 4 different new governances, 4 different new nations. And then from the northern one here will arise this small leader who starts out small with just a few friends. Through intrigue, he takes over, not through military power, but through intrigue. He takes over. He gets these 10 other nations to go in with him. And that is the person, when that person rises up, that is the person that will be the Antichrist. That is the person who will make this covenant for 7 years, who will confirm a covenant for 7 years.
So are the Sunnis more moderate, more secular than the Shiite?
They're both extraordinarily radical. So all the Sunnis, you know, that followed Osama bin Laden and crashed the planes, those were, you know, 9/11, those were Sunnis. All the ISIS guys who went around chopping heads off and all that for a few years, those were all Sunnis. And their main targets, the main targets for ISIS were these guys. They wanted to crucify upside down all these apostate Sunnis. I'm sorry, all these apostate Shiites. Because that's what their scriptures tell them they're supposed to do with apostate Muslims, is crucify them upside down. And you saw that happening, you know. And so that's the true face of Islam. It's very, very evil. You would expect it to be. This is a satanically inspired, you know, heretical form of Christianity is what it really is. I mean, truth be known, that's where it came from. So, so you would expect it to be about as evil as, you know, the devil could convince him to be. This is in Revelation 17. It's talking about the beast, and verse 9. This calls for a mind with wisdom. So it's just the 7-headed beast with the 10 horns. the 10 horns represent 10 kings, 10 kingdoms that give their power to the Antichrist in the end. And the 7 heads are the seven historical empires that very clearly throughout the Bible, at least, 6 of them are recorded there, not the 7. It tried to thwart God's plan for the ages to wipe out the Jews. And we'll take a look at those 7 real quickly. So verse 9, this calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills or 7 mountains on which the woman is. The woman is this false religion. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. So this is John, the Revelator, writing about 90 AD. 5 of these kingdoms have fallen. 1 currently is. The one that currently is, when John was on Patmos, was the guys that put him on Patmos, the Romans. The other has not yet come. So I believe the other that has not yet come was the empire that came after the Romans. It defeated the Roman Empire in 1400 finally, which was the Ottomans, the Muslim, the Caliphate there. And so historically in the Bible, here are the 7, here are the 5 heads that had fallen. Egypt, remember Pharaoh throwing all the kids in the river, to be eaten by the crocodiles, or telling the midwives to destroy, kill all the male children. Assyria conquered the northern kingdom and carried off, better part of 10 of the tribes and wiped them all out almost to a person. Same thing happened, when the Babylonians invaded and they wiped out most of the Jews and hauled a few thousand of them over to Babylon, Persia. With Esther, we've already talked about that. They had the plan to exterminate all the Jews, right? Greece. So one of the Antiochus Epiphanes here came in like 175 BC. 175 BC. He was one of the leaders of the Seleucid Empire, which is one of the 4 that got split up in Alexander the Great. He ended up coming to Jerusalem, setting up an abomination in the temple and killing quite a few Jews, but he didn't wipe out near as many as were wiped out by Babylon. The Grecian Empire definitely decimated the Jews, and then Rome, of course, had several battles with the Jews right up until 132 AD and killed millions of them. And there were a lot of Romans killed by the Jews too. And then, so 5 have fallen. 1 is. The other has not yet come. But this is the one that has not yet come. And then in the end times, this beast, this head, these are 5 heads, 6 heads, this is the 7th head, suffers a fatal head wound in 1921, gets set aside. But that thing gets reborn in the end times as the 8th kingdom. And the 8th kingdom will be comprised of all these others. Most of the land and people groups from all these others. So these 7 historical empires are the same peoples that form an alliance to destroy that's formed an alliance to destroy the reborn Jewish nation in 1948, 1967, 1973, And you can see the names of the cities, the names of the people groups, and the names of the nations in many, many places throughout the Bible. Like Psalm 83 lists. There's a list just from Psalm 83. These are the same groups of nations you see fighting over the turf in the Middle East in Daniel 7. Daniel 7 is talking about this business of the Antichrist and forming together this 10-nation confederacy. And Daniel 8 in the work up to the wars leading to this 8th beast empire. And in Daniel 8, these would include modern day Persia, which is Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Turkey, and Egypt. All the surrounding nations around Israel. These are the same groups of nations prophesied to invade Israel in the end times, which at that point includes at least 10 nations. Ezekiel 38, 39, these include Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, Beth Togarmah. All of those are in modern day Turkey. Those come from the list of nations in Genesis chapter 10. Those are basically the descendants of Noah and his sons. Also, he lists Persia, which is Iran, Kush, which is modern day Sudan, Put, which is modern day Libya. So that those North African nations, which are west of Egypt, are going to join together with the king of the north against Egypt in the end times. And Egypt's going to be totally wiped out. It's part of there's quite a bit of detail on this. Wow.
So is the United States postponing all this by support of Israel fighting back?
Is the United States the one to withhold?
I'm it's kind of running all over at the moment, right?
Yeah, principality, maybe, but the United States.
So these are the same group of nations that God gathers together to fight against his return. Calls them all into the valley of Jehoshaphat. Same group of nations you see destroyed on the day of the Lord. And there's lists in various places, with the prophets. And these are the same nations you see Jesus executing vengeance against upon his return. You read like Isaiah 63. Comes back, wipes out all the people, in Edom, gives all his blood on his garments. Same group of nations from where the Jewish slaves and exiles were gathered from after Jesus' return. So these are the surrounding nations today. Every single one of these nations is Islamic. Islam's the only religion on the face of the earth that's based on military conquest of the earth. And many of these Islamic nations have it in their charter that they got to get Jerusalem back under Islamic control. Wow. So, got a picture here of, Mecca. This is the Kaaba in Mecca where the Hajj takes place, this pilgrimage takes place. They have to walk around this thing a few times. But when all Muslims have to make a pilgrimage there. This little thing here covers a special rock. This is the rock that was supposedly Abraham stood on and with Ishmael while they were there building, Abraham was there building his first son's house. It's supposed to be inside this building, I guess, and this is a holy spot too. So, their view is that Isaac is not the child of the promise. The Jews rewrote the Bible and changed it all, but Ishmael is supposed to be the child of promise, and he's supposed to inherit all this stuff as the firstborn. Another picture here of the Kaaba, that exact same Kaaba, during the Hajj, during this pilgrimage. So this is in Mecca. There it is. See all this white stuff? That's not snow, those are pilgrims. It's the largest building in the world right here. That one. So there's a lot of, there's your oil money, you know, what it's done over the last, 90 years, basically. And then this metropolis just continues to grow. And so this is just another example of, this hate and this deception and this heart attitude, that's within this within this religion. Founding statement of the Houthis: God is the greatest, death to America, death to Israel, first the Jews. You have to believe these people. You have to believe what they say. So a nice quote here. John quoting Jesus: "All this I have told you so that you will not fall away." There will be this great falling away that takes place during the persecution, during the 42 months. They'll put you out of the synagogue. In fact, the time is coming, anyone who kills you will think they are offering a service to God. And that is exactly what Islam teaches. God wants you to kill these infidels. They won't submit, kill them. You're offering a service to God. And the last little slide here has to do with, I know I'm mixing a lot of stuff up here with the Daniel and Islam, but I really believe that this view in Daniel 8, shows us a picture of a war that's going to take place between the Sunnis and the Shiites in the near future. The Shiites will attempt to take over, and the Sunnis will resist that and then counterattack. And just before October 7th, another Sunni nation, in this case Saudi Arabia, a large Sunni nation, a powerful Sunni nation, an influential Sunni nation, was just getting ready to sign on to the Abraham Accords. So the Abraham Accords are set up so that a nation who signs on to that officially recognizes the nation of Israel. Egypt up was the only Arab nation or the only Islamic nation to recognize Israel officially for many years. Remember, I think it was Jimmy Carter was there, and Anwar Sadat was the president, and Menachem Begin. So they had probably at the White House or Camp David or something, there's this famous picture of them shaking hands. And then Sadat goes back to Egypt and gets assassinated nearly instantaneously, in
In a very, very public.
very,
setting.
very public setting,
Yeah.
which would be kind of like the president's inauguration speech in front of the White House. He gets like, because Muslim Brotherhood they didn't want that state of Israel to be recognized. So now Morocco is signed on. I think the UAE is signed on. I think there's a total of 4 countries now that recognize Israel. And Saudi Arabia was just about to. And then a lot of people think that's why Iran went ahead and pushed, this attack on Israel, but it had been planned for a while. So it's hard to say if that was the real motivating factor. But certainly it's pushed that away. With the Abraham Accords recognizing Israel's right to exist, inherent in that statement is saying, okay, your borders, which cover this land, which God gave to Abraham a long time ago, does indeed belong to the Jews, and we recognize it. Now, they're not saying the land all the way to the Euphrates River and all the way down to the Wadi of Egypt, but at least the land they're sitting on right now, they're recognizing the Jews have a country, that's your borders, and you have a right to that. So that would strengthen that holy covenant. And I believe that's what in Daniel 9, when he says he will confirm a covenant or he will strengthen a covenant, I believe he's talking about the holy covenant there. Not a new.
So do you think that this man of lawlessness is a sign of the Abraham Accords?
Well, it could be, the Abraham Accords could be.
Confirmation of the covenant.
Says he'll confirm a covenant with many or strengthen a covenant with many. So if a whole bunch of Sunni nations signed on to that, that could really kick off a big fight between the Shiites and the Sunnis. And it's very interesting when Iran launched their attack with however many missiles, and it's 130 or something like that, ballistic missiles and so many drones and so many whatever else they shot from Iran. Saudi Arabia and Iraq, for the very first time, turned over their airspace to the Israeli Air Force and implemented this Middle East Air Defense, MEAD. This Middle East Air Defense is part of the Abraham Accords. So they actually implemented that, even though those countries haven't signed on to it yet. And so for the very first time, you saw this these Sunni nations open up their airspace for Israeli jets to operate over. And they specifically did that to prevent the attack by the Sunni nation on Israel. Yeah.
So do the Sunnis hate Shiites more than they hate the Jews?
Not yet.
Probably not, but because of what happens there, I mean, these guys are like laser 100% focused on taking this back. This just overriding hatred. It's almost like Hitler at the end of World War II. You know, he's being attacked from all sides. He's losing from all sides. But he said, "Don't stop the trains." You know, killing of the Jews in Auschwitz and everywhere else. The transport in Germany, they had first priority over moving troops and equipment, everything else. Moving those Jews to the gas chambers had first priority. It's like this insanity that takes over, and you end up, it's like shooting yourself in the foot with shotguns. And so these guys, they're focused on their mission, which is taking this. Now they understand these guys are in the way. These guys are not cooperating. These guys are in the way. So in order to get here, they've got to come through Saudi Arabia. If they want to take Israel out militarily, in my humble opinion, the fastest and smartest way to do that is to take over the Gulf oil and become powerful enough. Now you've got to deal with it. I've got all that power. Now you don't have a choice.
Or you keep taking money from the US.
Say again?
You keep getting money from the US.
Oh, yeah. Billions, plane loads.
Hey, Joey, I need more money.
Yeah, it's so wild. So these guys used to be a US ally before 1979. They didn't participate in any of the wars against Israel in 48, 67, or 73. Now, and then it was all these guys who were attacking at that point. Now that it's totally reversed and flipped around on its ear now. So since 79, these guys want to attack, and these guys are now saying, we don't want it. We don't want that. You know, we want some peace. The moderate Arabs saying we want some peace and we can deal with Israel. Now they're even making these Middle East air defense. You could call that an alliance, a type of sorts. Because these guys are concerned about Iran's nuclear capabilities and taking over these two holy sites. as well as olive oil. So they're sort of forming an alliance of sorts with Israel now, but it's not gonna hold. It's a deception. It's a false peace. It's a covenant with death, Isaiah calls it. And so when the counterattack happens and the little horn arises from this area here, this Turkey Syria area, then he'll strengthen his covenant for 7 years, and Israel will expect peace. They'll think they're at peace. Yeah, peace and safety. They'll be saying peace and safety, but sudden destruction comes, and then the 3.5-year mark of that 70th week of Daniel, they get attacked, brutally attacked, and then Jacob's trouble kicks off. Okay, so
Are they gonna sell the Jews into all the other nations and stuff? There's a couple of places where the nations are, used to be calling the Jews back from.
yeah, and so 2/3 of them will get killed. Half of the survivors, half of the 1/3 survivors will then be sold into slavery in all these surrounding nations. And then the other half of the survivors will actually survive in the siege of Jerusalem right up until the end. And there's also, I can't pull that scripture out of my head, but the Antichrist will not be successful against Ammon and parts of Moab here. So there's this reference to the Jews being taken out of Jerusalem and for 1,260 days into the wilderness and protected, where they will be out of harm's way, out of reach of the Antichrist armies. And so that could be what's being talked about there, because Ammon and it's part of Moab will not fall prey to the Antichrist. So that probably is where those Jews will be protected. So, you know, if the math is right, then 1/6 of the nation will, you know, or thereabouts will flee. We know there'll be 144,000 survivors, you know, that are sealed, but how many actually will survive that? I don't know the exact number.
Passage about Moab not being, is that in Daniel or is that?
I can't remember. It's either Ezekiel or Daniel. I'll look it up real quick though.
Isaiah 15:5 maybe? Or Jeremiah 48:9. My heart shall cry out for Moab, his fugitives shall flee unto Zor. Separate fields on.
Can't get some control of my browser here. There we
Even
go.
more
Moab
Jeremiah.
and common people of Ammon.
There you go.
That's in Daniel 11. You'll also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from the sea of Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon.
That's it.
Where was that? Daniel 11.
We were talking about the two views, of Daniel. I'm wondering if the vision Daniel received, how it parallels the actual battles you were talking about in the time. If he was given this vision because he would have understood this vision better with paralleling it like that, because he would have understood the battles. Does that make sense?
That's the way I see it.
That's why he
exactly
was
right.
given it that way. It's harder for us because we're not Daniel, we weren't there. You know, we have to dig and try to understand this, but maybe on the surface, Daniel would have been more like, oh, okay, yeah, I can relate.
I think you have to go back to the idea that, and whether it's valid or not, there's discussion on it. That a lot of prophecies in the Old Testament have dual fulfillments. Okay?
Yeah.
Some of the ones what Christ seemed to have, fulfilled them partly while he was here, but then others that are for when he comes back.
Mhm.
The prophecy in Malachi about Elijah coming back, all right? Well, he tells us John the Baptist is Elijah,
Yeah.
but yet then he still says that Elijah will still come.
Yeah.
So a lot of passages that we see, and I think this one in Daniel is like this, is there's more dual fulfillments of it. Because we saw it in history after Daniel, we look back on history and say, yeah, pretty much those battles that he described, they happened, all right? But then, Gabriel said this for the time of the end.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, this is going on. And Gabriel's telling, these are the kingdoms you know, okay? This is the kingdom of Media and Persia, you know this kingdom, the kingdom of Greece, you know that kingdom. All right, so those are these are happening now. All right, and you're gonna see it because you see these kingdoms, all right? But it's for the time of the end. So I think it's the same type of thing. So when we look at, we saw fulfillment of it, but we're gonna see it again.
Yeah, and we're seeing geopolitically and religiously with Islam and the Islamic
Kingdom.
kingdom or, you know, caliphate. You can look at that geography today and it overlays perfectly with Daniel. I mean, perfectly. And not only that, we're seeing today, not only all this lawlessness increase, and so many other signs of the times prophetically with Israel itself, you know, taking back over the land and then taking back over Jerusalem. I mean, none of these prophecies make any sense unless the Jews are living in the land and living in Jerusalem and owning it, see? So all these major events that have already taken place and are set up. And then geopolitically, you see Iran over the last, since 1979, just really launching out, you know, in full steam, putting all their money, all their efforts into taking over, retaking, I should say, over the whole Middle East. And then at the same time, you got this guy Erdogan. He's like Putin in Russia. He's like going to be the president now for the third time, I think. And his vision, everything this guy lives and breathes for, he's a radical Islamist guy. He's a radical, he wants to rebuild that Ottoman Empire.
Is he the
And that's
president?
all he thinks about.
Where is he?
Turkey,
He's in Turkey.
yeah, a NATO ally. By far the most powerful military force in the entire Middle East. You know, I
You
mean,
guy from the north.
well, yeah, and he owns the territory, which is biblically called Yavon, you know, just Daniel's prophecy.
Will it come to Pergamum?
Yeah, Pergamon's there,
The state of Satan?
yeah. And, you know, it's translated to Greece in most American Bibles. Well, up until I think it's 1923, Western Turkey was part of Greece. You know, they did this land swap with Turkey and Greece when Turkey was created as a nation, and all the Christians moved to the islands and all the Muslims moved off the islands back onto the mainland Turkey. But you know, but it is Turkey, you know, Turkey was the home of the Ottoman Empire, and capital of the Ottoman Empire, is Istanbul, it used to be Constantinople. And so they want it back. They want that Ottoman Empire back. They're focused on it. Just like Putin wants to rebuild the Soviet Union, same type of attitude. And then the Islam, or the Shiites there in Iran, they want to correct the heretical mistakes that have been made over the centuries and get all the Muslims back on the true path, the Shiite Islam. And then Saudi Arabia is just sitting on it now as the heirs, but they didn't militarily take it over. It was just like handed to them, by Britain, because, in British Petroleum, they just wanted to get it there and operate and get all that oil, and so did we. And so we've been protecting, propping them up. And so they're sitting on the two holy sites. This is driving Turkey crazy, and it's driving Iran crazy, but that's why Iran wants to push all the United States forces out of the whole Middle East. As long as they're there, as long as we're there, it's a big risk for them to attack. But if we evacuate the Middle East, our base is there, then there's nothing keeping those guys back. And they might just develop nuclear weapons to do it anyway. Well, yeah, it's time.
Right, so we have guys in our military that think like you,
Nope,
interpret this out of the
a
Bible
few,
and get us ready for some of this stuff.
but they are kicked out as fast as they can be exposed.
Wow.
Purged, yeah, that's really true. Yeah. But I used to talk about this stuff to some of my colleagues, when I was still in and working there, and it got pretty interesting, some of the conversations. They think that nobody could take on Saudi Arabia, and Iran couldn't do it. They're a backwards country, and Saudi Arabia is so advanced. They're such an advanced country, and I'm like, those guys,
They got no military.
they got no military, yeah. They say, oh, but they fly F-15 fighters. I'm like, yeah, the five princes in the Saudi royal family are F-15 fighter pilots. But they got US instructor in the back.
All
seat,
five of the Air Force.
fly. But then, as soon as the balloon goes up, those guys are gonna hop on their private jets and fly to the Cayman Islands. They're not gonna stand and fight.
Like all those groups I took to Haiti, we always had a guard with a shotgun, and we had a leather thing with shotgun shells in it. And people like, well, at least we have a guard. I'm like, if anything goes down, he's gonna shoot it out for us, he's gonna be flying, get out of.
Yeah, he's there for the pay for those days.
Yeah.
Hope nothing happens. Okay, gentlemen, Rick, I gotta hand it to you. I did not think you were gonna get through that today. I did not think you were gonna get through that entire thing, and you sure have.
Can we get those sheets that you added at the beginning
Yeah.
for our
Yeah.
studies?
And
Send those to me and I'll send them out to you.
yeah, I'm actually like gonna turn those into a lesson, but I mean, I can send them out as they are now, if you want.
Prelude to chapter 4.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's pray.